Hi everyone, my name is Aditi Bhattu and I'm a recent postgraduate from the National Institute of Pharmaceutical Education and Research, Guwahati, that is NIPA Guwahati, India. And today in this presentation, I would like to give you all a brief overview of my recent research work, that is a systematic review and meta-analysis on the following topics as you can see on the screen. The topic of my presentation here is the impact of nicotine replacement therapy on maternal neonatal outcomes and smoking cessation in pregnant smoking women. So let's begin with the presentation now. Tobacco has been around us for centuries, but what we know about the health damage from smoking is much newer. Smoking tobacco introduces not only nicotine, but more than 5,000 chemicals in our body, including numerous carcinogens that can enter our lungs, blood, and organs. Smoking tobacco, according to the stats, causes the death of more than 7 million people worldwide and 1.2 million people indirectly due to the passive exposure to the smoke. Thus, we can say that tobacco smoking is the most serious cause of death worldwide. Tobacco smoking is also one of the most serious but preventable cause of a wide range of adverse maternal and neonatal outcomes. That might include the placental abruption, miscarriage, preterm birth, and low birth weight. Now we know that nicotine replacement therapy is one of the most commonly used interventions for smoking cessation, and its efficacy has been proved worldwide, but its use in pregnancy is still controversial. We know that gestational period is one of the most critical and sensitive phase of the fetus development. So during this phase, if the woman continues to smoke, the fetus can be exposed to various numerous hazardous substances that might harm the fetus. Thus, the main aim of the systematic review and meta-analysis was to evaluate the efficacy and safety of NRT in pregnant smoking women with a specific focus on the neonatal outcome. Let's move on to the aims and objective of the study. The main aim of the study was to assess the impact of nicotine replacement therapy on maternal and neonatal outcomes, as well as its effectiveness in promoting smoking cessation among the pregnant women. Moving on to the objectives. The first objective of our study was to systematically review and analyze the existing studies to determine the influence of NRT on maternal and neonatal health during the pregnancy. The second objective of our study was to evaluate the success of NRT as a tool for facilitating smoking cessation among the pregnant. Let's move on to the methodology of the study. Here we have is the eligibility criteria for the inclusion and exclusion of studies. For the population, pregnant smokers who were 18 years or older than 18 years were considered and who are currently receiving the NRT as a therapy were included in the study. For the exclusion, non-pregnant women or pregnant women who were not smokers were excluded. For the intervention, different forms of NRT such as nicotine gums, patches, lozenges, inhalers, and nasal sprays were included, while the studies that solely focused on the non-nicotine interventions like the behavioral interventions without the use of NRT were excluded here. For the comparator, placebo or any active control other than nicotine replacement therapy was considered, while no comparison group studies or studies comparing different form of NRT without a control group were excluded here. For the study design, randomized control trials, either they had an individual level of randomization or a group level of randomization were included, while the studies having designs like crossover trials, case controls, cohort studies, cross-sectional and systematic review, etc., were excluded. For the publication type, no limit was applied with regard to the publication year, and the full text articles in which the language was not English were excluded. So the study protocol was prepared and is registered in Prospero with the following registration ID. So we considered the literature search in various electronic platforms using PubMed, Google Scholar, Cochrane Central, clinicaltrials.gov, etc. from inception to 31st January 2023. For the study selection and data extraction, Based on the inclusion and exclusion criteria, the studies were selected, and the independent primary and secondary screening was performed for them. This data was extracted into the Microsoft Excel sheet, including the study characteristics and the outcome data. For the outcomes, we had divided them into two parts, the primary outcome and the secondary outcome. Our primary outcome of interest here was smoking cessation, while the secondary outcomes we considered were maternal and neonatal outcomes. Here, there's a given list of various maternal and neonatal outcomes that we considered in the study. So let's move on to the statistical analysis part of the study. For statistical analysis, we conducted a meta-analysis, and the software we used here was the Review Manager with the version 5.4.5. For the continuous outcomes, mean difference was calculated, while for the dichotomous outcomes, the odds ratio was calculated. For the assessment of publication bias within the studies, a funnel plot was used, while for detecting the heterogeneity among the studies, I-square test and the Cochrane Q test was done. While we can see here, random effect model was used when heterogeneity was present. That means that I-square value was greater than 50%. Random effect model was used, while no heterogeneity was present, then we used fixed effect model. That is, I-square value would be less than 50%. To check the robustness of the included studies, we also did the sensitivity analysis there. So let's move on to the results section of the study. Now, here we can see is the PRISMA flowchart. Now, PRISMA flowchart, as we know, is divided into 4 phases. For the first phase, that is the identification phase, the screening phase, eligibility phase, and finally, the included studies. For the identification of the studies, we identified records from various platforms like PubMed, Google Scholar, Cochrane Central, and the total number we got here was 155. While no additional records were identified from other sources like clinicaltrials.gov and ICTRP. Further, 131 records were remaining after the duplicates was removed here. After this, 90 records were screened as 41 records were excluded here as they didn't had, as their study design was different from what we included in our inclusion criteria. Further moving on, in these 90 records, 58 full text articles were assessed for their eligibility, as 30 records had been excluded as they had no information according to our objectives. In this 58 full text articles, further 28 studies were included in the quantitative synthesis, and after that, 20 studies were finally included in the quantitative and qualitative synthesis. So this was all about the PRISMA flowchart. Let's move on to the outcome section of the study. Here we can see our main outcome of interest, that is the smoking cessation. Here we see is a forest plot for the same, where we included 4 studies. In this, the total pooled overall odds ratio we got was 2.08 with a 95% of confidence interval and a p-value of 0.04. Now, as we can see, the I-square value here was 72%. So we followed the random effect model here. So the value we got from the odds ratio suggests that the use of NRT favors smoking cessation in the pregnant. Next outcomes we have here is low birth weight and the neonatal deaths. For the low birth weight, 6 studies were included here, and we got a pool overall odds ratio of 1.32 with a 98% of confidence interval and a p-value of 0.07. This further suggests that there was an increased risk of low birth weight with the use of NRT. And in the neonatal deaths, 4 studies were included, where we got an overall odds ratio of 2.89 with a 95% of confidence interval and a p-value of 0.02. Moving on further, we have outcomes which are congenital abnormalities and cesarean delivery. For the congenital abnormalities, 4 studies were included here, and the overall odds ratio we got was 0.62 with a 95% confidence interval and a p-value of 0.03. Here, the results suggest that the risk of congenital abnormalities was lesser with the use of NRT. While in the cesarean delivery, four studies were included, and the overall odds ratio we got is 1.35 with a 95% of confidence interval and and a significant p-value. Here we can see that the risk of cesarean delivery increased with the use of NRT. Next, we have the outcomes, that is assisted vaginal delivery and premature rupture of membrane. For the assisted vaginal delivery, the total odds ratio was 0.72 with a 95% confidence interval here also, and the p-value was 0.02. This further suggests that the risk of assisted vaginal delivery decreased with the use of NRT. And for the premature rupture of membrane, here we see that the overall odds ratio for the included three studies was 0.29 with a 95% of confidence interval and a p-value of 0.04. So this also suggests that the risk of premature rupture of membrane was significantly lower with the use of NRQ. Thus, now this was all about the significant outcomes we got. And coming upon the conclusion of the study, the use of NRG in pregnant women is associated with both benefits and risks. That means NRT was found to increase the risk of neonatal deaths, low birth rate, and cesarean delivery, but it was also associated with the reduced risk of congenital abnormalities, assisted vaginal delivery, and premature rupture of membrane. Further, we found out that NRT was also effective in increasing the smoking cessation among the pregnant women compared to the control group. Thus, overall, these findings suggest the importance of careful consideration of the potential risks and benefits while deciding the use of NRT during the pregnancy. And thus further suggests that there is a need of individualized smoking cessation plans for the pregnant women. Thank you, everyone.